Hello and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this section, we'll be going over the different tools in Photoshop, and in this video, we'll be starting the creation tools. We've gone over the tools to select a layer's contents, we've gone over the tools to manipulate those contents, but all of those are things that you do to pre-existing images. How do we go about creating new content in Photoshop from scratch? One way is with the creation tools. Since we're going to be creating from scratch, I'm going to make a new blank document to use as our canvas. To do that, I could go up to File, New, or I could use my keyboard shortcut by hitting Control-N on my keyboard. For this document, I'm going to go ahead and use the default Photoshop size, 7 inches by 5 inches, with a resolution of 72 pixels per inch and a white background. But I'm only going to use this canvas to play around with the tools, and I think it might be more fun to have a background color besides white. So I'm going to click this little swatch picker on the right, choose a light color for my background, and click both OK buttons to create my new document. The creation tool I'll be starting with is the brush tool. It's in the top third section of the tools panel, located directly below the healing tools. Before I start brushing, I want to make sure that it's going on a separate layer from my background. So I'll go down to the bottom of the Layers panel and click the New Layer icon. If you've been following the last few videos, you already have a head start on how brushes work. The Quick Selection, Healing, Clone Stamp, History Brush, and Eraser are all examples of tools that utilize the same basic brush technology. The difference with using the brush tool directly is that the options for application become practically limitless. I'm going to try using the brush in its default state on my new blank layer. You can see that we're using a small black brush with a very soft edge. Let's check out the most basic options we have. Up in the tool options, I'll click the button for the brush preset picker. Here we have an option for the size of the brush. And here we have an option for the hardness of the brush. I'm going to increase the hardness to 100%. Then I'll brush a little bit on my blank layer. Now you can see that the edge of the brush is much harder, making it seem more focused. I'm going to go back to the brush preset picker. If we look below the option for hardness, we see a bunch of thumbnails of various shapes and sizes. These are brush presets that come with Photoshop by default. I'm going to click on the first one in the third row here, called Flat, Blunt, Short, Stiff, and brush with it. You can see that this brush behaves in a completely different way from our standard default brush. It doesn't stop here either. If you go back up to the brush preset picker, there are many more presets if you just scroll down a little bit. And if you go up to this gear wheel button on the top right, there are entire sets of brushes that look and function in completely different ways. It really shows you how much diversity Photoshop has to offer, even by default. It's nice to have all these options, but what if you want to create your own brush entirely? No problem. Let's say I want to make a brush out of all these strokes I've made. All I have to do is Control-click on my layer thumbnail to select all the contents of that layer. Then I'll go up to Edit, Define Brush Preset. I'm going to rename this to New Brush. and click OK. Now I will deselect my previous brush strokes by pressing Ctrl D on my keyboard. Then I'll delete this layer by dragging it to the delete icon at the bottom of the layers panel, and create a new blank layer by clicking the new layer icon. As I hover around my canvas with the brush tool, you can see an outline of the new brush I made. It's a little big at the moment, so I will decrease the size by hitting the left bracket key on my keyboard a few times. Now I'll just brush with it a bit. You can see that it's using an exact copy of what I selected as a functioning brush. And this is just the beginning. If we want to customize further, all we have to do is go up to the Tool Options and click the Brush Panel button. This brings up many more options to play with. You can see that not only do we have a bunch of presets in this section on the right, but we also have these individual settings on the left. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll give you a basic idea of what we're dealing with. If I click here on the second option, Shape Dynamics, it will replace our preset viewer with the Shape Dynamics options. The first slider we have is the size jitter. In Photoshop, jitter basically means the amount of randomness. So 0% jitter will stick with your original design, whereas 100% jitter will be completely random. I'm going to go ahead and increase this all the way to 100%. Then I'm going to brush just a little bit on the canvas. You can see that the brush is continuing to use my custom preset, but it's randomly changing the size of the shape as I drag. Back in the brush panel, I'm going to go up to the scattering option, directly below the shape dynamics. I'll go ahead and increase the scattering to about 200%. Now as I brush in the canvas, the initial instance of my brush is being randomly sized and scattered away from my pointer. Finally, if we want to change the color of our brush, all we have to do is change the foreground color down here in the Tools panel. I'll go ahead and change my foreground color to a shade of green. Then I'll brush in the canvas again. You can see that through these options, we can customize some very complex and unique images to help create content in Photoshop from scratch. The next tool I'll be going over is very similar to the brush tool. Back in my Tools panel, I'm going to right-click my brush tool to bring up the flyout menu and choose the pencil tool. The pencil tool can use a lot of the same presets that the brush tool uses, but it functions just a little bit differently. When I hover over my canvas and brush with it, straight away you can see that the default size is extremely thin. In fact, if I open up the preset picker, you can see that the size is set to 1 pixel wide. But just like with the brush tool, I can still control the size whenever I like. Another way the pencil tool differs from the brush tool is how it handles hardness. Down here in the hardness, the pencil tool is set at 100% hardness. I'm going to go ahead and increase the size of the brush to about 70 pixels. That way I can see the edges of the brush a little bit better. Then I'll use the pencil to do a little bit of brushing here. So my pencil is brushing with a very hard edge, which is to be expected since it is at 100% hardness. Now I'll go back to the preset picker and I'll try reducing the hardness to 0%. Watch what happens when I try brushing again. You can see that adjusting the hardness did nothing at all. This is just how the pencil tool operates as opposed to the brush tool. Another thing that sets the pencil tool apart is up here in the tool options. Here's a button that says Auto Erase. I'm going to select it and then go back to my canvas. Now I'll click outside my penciling and drag over my previous penciling. It doesn't seem like Auto Erase is erasing anything at all. But watch what happens when I click and drag with my crosshair starting inside my penciling. Now the tool is brushing with black. And if we check over in the Tools panel, we can see that it's because my background color is black. As I use the pencil tool, I can continue making lines inside themselves, and Photoshop will automatically switch between my foreground and background colors. If we want to manually switch between foreground and background colors, we can go back to the Tools panel and click this tiny curved double arrow, and my background will become my foreground, and vice versa. We can also switch foreground and background colors on the fly just by hitting X on the keyboard. This can be extremely useful as you're brushing, being able to switch colors at any time with the X key. Another neat thing we can do with all the brush tools is constrain them with the Shift key. If I start dragging my brush, then press and hold my Shift key, Photoshop automatically constrains my brush to paint in a straight line. This works whether I'm painting horizontally or vertically. My favorite thing about using the Shift key while brushing is this. I'm just going to click once with my brush over here. Then I will press and hold my Shift key before I click for the second time all the way over here. I can continue this process as long as I like, just holding the Shift key and clicking once at a time to set points for Photoshop to draw between. That will do it for these brush and pencil tools. We'll go over some more creation tools in the next video.